need to get on the radio and explain how both of them are wrong. Greg Willard, professor at St. Louis University Law School and a KTRS legal analyst. Good morning, Professor Greg Willard.
Good morning, McGraw.
All right, so what was wrong with their analysis of this?
Well, I think I wouldn't say wrong. I'd say perhaps a little misguided. Let's take a history lesson for a moment, McGraw, if we may. You and I have done that on the air from time to time. Back in Middle Ages England, the king had what was called dispensation powers, and he unilaterally could dispense with certain laws and just say we're not going to follow them.
Right.
Well, that background was part of the basis upon which the framers of our Constitution wrote that document. Well, in Article 2 of that document, our head of state, the president, he is obligated to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
Okay.
Congress was given the power to establish uniform naturalization laws. And that's our system of checks and balances. What we have then, fast forwarding to the 21st century, is we've got a situation where we have 800,000 of these young folks who I think the following could be agreed even by Roy Blunt or Tony Messenger or Bernie Sanders and Ted Cruz.
Right.
These dreamers are here illegally. They are here through absolutely no fault of their own. They are innocent victims.
Right.
And the notion that they are going to be summarily rounded up, arrested, and deported is just beyond the pale.
Right.
So we need a solution. What President Obama did was this. He said in 2001, Dick Durbin and Orrin Hatch, imagine that combination,
Right.
proposed legislation called the DREAM Act, and it floundered in the Congress for years. Lots of pressure on President Obama, and he very publicly said, quote, "I'm not the king. I'm required to follow the law," close quote.
Right.
And it continued to flounder in the Congress. He then said, I'm going to do something on my own. And he issued in 2010 this DACA order.
Right.
And he then announced, I just changed the law.
Right.
So the criticism that President Trump is getting for announcing that he is going to rescind President Obama's order, I think is, from a constitutional, put the policy aside, is that criticism is misplaced.
I agree with you. We got you, me, and Donald Trump all agreeing together. No,
that may be a first,
well,
my
the
friend.
world is upside down now. I agree with you completely. I think, and this has been underreported, not reported, and I said this yesterday at some point. I think I did. And if I didn't, I'll doctor the tape to make sure I did say it yesterday. But I think you're exactly right. The other choice was to have some federal judge throw it out on its ear, right? Which is why he had to act as soon as he did. So we didn't know what the judge was going to do. He said, look, he's like, you can't do this. I'll keep it in effect for 6 more months. Congress, do your job and pass the law.
Yes. Yes. Because going back to our history lesson a moment ago, it is at the core of not only their job, but their plenary power to pass these laws. In addition to DACA, in 2014, President Obama ordered DAPA for parents. So you had, with DACA, you have about 800,000 young people. With DAPA in 2014, there's about 5 million adults.
Right.
That was enjoined by a federal judge in Texas. That was affirmed by the Fifth Circuit, and by a vote of 4-4,
right,
it was upheld by the Supreme Court. So DAPA, as to these 5 million adults, is no longer in force.
Right. Throwing everything into more chaos.
Into more chaos.
Right.
And then DACA had not been enjoined yet, but it was still subject to this.
Right.
If one president can do it with a flick of a pen, the other can undo it with a flick of a pen.
And what's interesting about all of this is I think you're exactly right. You would have thrown it into complete chaos because you would have had these students, these dreamers who are in the military, instantaneously be illegal immigrants. And so you would have, you would have to throw them out of the military if this judge ruled that what Obama did was unconstitutional.
Well, and I would put even a finer point on it, McGraw. Even with DACA, as a technical matter, they are here illegally.
Yes.
What President what President Obama said was, I'm going to exercise what is called prosecutorial discretion. And we are going to exercise our discretion not to deport these 800,000.
Right, okay. But he also said, and everyone understands, right, that you emphasize one over another because you can't do everything. But didn't he also say, hey, if you go to school, you can join the military? I mean, he took it 2 or 3 steps further than we're not going to deport these people first.
Well, some of his opponents would characterize it as prosecutorial discretion on steroids.
Right.
It's one thing not to bring a criminal charge in a different context, a criminal charge based upon certain facts as to an individual defendant. It's another thing to say, well, as to these nearly 1 million people,
right,
I'm not going to enforce the law, and furthermore, I'm going to give all these benefits. But I think the additional point, McGraw, is Senator Blunt was on the program the other day, and I think the word he used was outrageous.
Yes.
And it's outrageous that this problem hasn't been solved. Well, I would submit to you a couple of observations. One, the reason for several years that it has not been solved is that the Senate, specifically Senate Republicans, have not voted to allow cloture, to allow it to come to a vote. Secondly, earlier this week, President Trump reached across the aisle and reached a deal for Hurricane Harvey relief and for the debt ceiling. And shock and horror among Republican stalwarts that this has happened.
Yes.
Well, let me remind those Republican stalwarts that in the mid-1960s, the signature achievement of President Lyndon Johnson, the civil rights legislation in the mid-60s, that was accomplished not through the great stellar performance by the Democratic Party. No, my friend, if you go back and look, it was the Republicans who helped get that legislation passed because it was a huge block of the Democratic Party who was blocking it and filibustering it. And Everett
those Dixiecrats and those Southern Democrats.
And Everett Dirksen and Jerry Ford, my former boss, they were able to team up with President Johnson. So I think in the category of our listeners, McGraw, stay tuned in terms of DACA.
Yeah.
Because if this portends what we may be seeing down the road in terms of Trump reaching across the aisle, these Republicans who have said, well, we need to solve this Dreamers problem, but then block the legislation.
To solve the problem. Yeah. All right, last question for you. Will you yield for a question?
The floor is yielded, my friend.
Greg Willard, professor at St. Louis University. So if a dreamer has a child here in America, is that child a U.S. citizen?
Yes. Yes.
So an illegal immigrant having a child on U.S. soil, that child is an American citizen.
Yes. If the child is born in the United States, they are a United States citizen, irrespective of the status of their parents, McGraw.
And that's because that is it's not mentioned in the Constitution, right?
No, that's part of this. The constitutional power of Congress to...
Right, but it says if you're born in the United States, you're an American citizen.
Yes.
It doesn't say a legal resident. It just says if you're born on U.S. soil, you're an American citizen.
And the "it" in your comment is the statute that Congress has enacted. And so, yes. And you'll read from time to time, there's a lot of controversy, particularly in the Southwest, of mothers will come across the border to have their child born. Purposely have her child born.
Can I ask a quick question?
We are short on time. Quickly.
Just really quickly, do they have to be born in a hospital so they're documented, or is that okay?
If they are born within the physical United States, they are a citizen.
It could be an Uber on the way to the hospital.
Uber on the way to the hospital, or in the KTRS studios.
Yeah, there you go. We will hold off on that comment for a moment. That's another credit and a half towards your law degree at St. Louis University Law School. Greg Willard, always a pleasure. Thank